Hello friends. Today we're going to be exploring another biography, this time about Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale was a nurse, but she was more than that. She helped so much with the medical industry by emphasizing things like good, hot, nutritious food, cleanliness, and organization in hospitals. Because of that, she is remembered for all of the great work she has done. Let's go ahead and read about her. Florence Nightingale by Demi. Ooh, looks like somebody was saving that page. Florence Nightingale was born to English parents in Florence, Italy, on May 12, 1820. Just 1 year earlier, her older sister, Parthenope, had been born in Naples, Italy, which used to be called Parthenope. When Florence was 1 year old, the Nightingale family returned to England. They lived in a large house called Leyhurst in Derbyshire. They were very wealthy, and William Nightingale, Florence's father, had a grand library where he loved to read his books. Fanny Nightingale, Florence's mother, entertained all the most famous artists, writers, and politicians of the day. For even bigger parties, the Nightingales bought another estate called Embley Park near London. Florence didn't like parties. She liked to daydream and play by herself. She would imagine running a hospital and made detailed lists and charts of all the medicine, equipment, and expenses needed. When she caught whooping cough, she made a doll hospital and pretended her dolls were also sick. She laid them out with cloths around their necks in beds set up in a long line, the way hospitals arranged patients at the time. When Florence and Parthenope were teenagers, the family traveled throughout Europe. Florence met many famous people and visited beautiful places. But everywhere she went, she noticed the suffering of the sick and the poor people all around her. She kept a detailed record of European hospitals and charities, just like the list she had made as a young girl. Florence was a religious person, and she felt that God wanted her to help people. She soon decided that the way to do this was to become a nurse. But this idea horrified her parents. They wouldn't let her study nursing. They didn't think that it was proper for a lady. In 1847, Florence traveled to Italy with her parents' friends, Charles and Selina Bracebridge. Later, they went on to Egypt and Germany. When they were in Germany, the Bracebridges allowed Florence to visit an orphanage in Kaiserwerth. She spent 2 weeks there learning about hygiene and the practice of nursing. Florence became more convinced than ever that she was meant to be a nurse. Her parents still did not agree, but they eventually saw how determined their daughter was and let her choose her own path. Florence went to Paris, France, in February 1853 and visited hospitals and poorhouses. She watched doctors and surgeons at work, and she sent questions to hospitals in England, Germany, and France. She took the different answers to these questions and compared them to one another, asking herself which methods were best. These responses helped her teach herself about the world of medicine. That same year, Florence got her first job, though she wasn't paid for it. She became superintendent of London's Institution for the Care of Sick Gentlewomen in Distressed Circumstances. That's a mouthful. It was a place where women who were poor and ill could go for medical care. Florence made many improvements in her new job. She taught the nurses who worked with her that the hospital must be clean and organized so that they could give the patients the best possible care. She stressed the importance of providing hot water and hot food and put in bells for the patients to ring when they needed a nurse. A year later, Florence felt that her work at the women's hospital was finished. At this time, the British Army was fighting in the Crimean War, and reports about the terrible conditions faced by the sick and injured soldiers were trickling back to England. Many of the soldiers were suffering from a disease called cholera. Of course, when Florence heard of this problem, she began to consider how to fix it. When she was asked by the Secretary at War to bring a group of nurses to the military hospital in Scutari, Turkey, she readily agreed. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was important to her to bring her medical knowledge and skills to a place where they would be needed. Florence knew that war hospitals had very few supplies and not enough food. They were usually extremely dirty, without beds for the patients or trained workers who would know how to heal the soldiers. In Turkey, the doctors were at first reluctant to get help from Florence and her nurses. But when many more soldiers arrived in the hospital after the Battle of Baklava, it became clear that help was needed. Florence arranged for the patients to eat healthy food and worked to get more of the necessary supplies, like bandages and medicines. Even with these new improvements, though, the soldiers seemed to be staying ill for a long time and getting sicker rather than better. An investigation soon showed that the sewers weren't draining well. The germs from the sewers were making the soldiers sick. Once this problem was fixed, the patients began to heal. It was at the military hospital that Florence became known as the Lady with the Lamp. She earned this nickname because she often visited the sick soldiers at night, carrying a small lamp to light the way. The hospital was very dark at night, so it was easy to see Florence holding her lamp high as she made her rounds. The Crimean War ended in 1856, and Florence Nightingale traveled back to England. She used the knowledge she had gained from her experiences during the war to write reports about how to make hospitals better, especially army hospitals. These reports were sent to people in the government, and Florence even met with Queen Victoria and Prince Albert of England to tell them about how medical care could be improved. In 1857, a commission was formed to look into how the British Army took care of wounded and ill soldiers. This commission was a group of people who studied Army medical care, and the best resource for this information was Florence Nightingale. Florence told the men on the commission about her experiences during the Crimean War and explained that improvements like a clean environment and healthy meals would save countless lives. Her main point was that many of the sicknesses in Army hospitals could actually be prevented. With better basic care, they could be stopped before they started. This was a new idea, and not everyone was convinced by it. But Florence kept trying. Florence worked so hard for other people, fighting to make Army hospitals better, that she wore herself out. She collapsed and went to her aunt's house to recuperate. Although she lived many more years, she never fully recovered from this illness. Florence began to study more than just medicine. She had identified a serious problem and knew that she must work to make conditions better, not just in one type of hospital, but in all hospitals. Her new goal was to improve the overall organization of hospitals. No detail was too small. She thought about everything from how a hospital should be built so that it was more efficient to how far apart the patient's beds should be. Florence worked tirelessly to be heard, and it paid off. Many people in England gave money to support her cause. She used this money to set up the Nightingale Fund. It eventually helped to start a school in London, the Nightingale Training School for Nurses, which opened in 1860. The nurses from this school worked all over the world, and they carried Florence's ideas with them. As time passed, Florence Nightingale's reputation became widely known. In 1861, during the American Civil War, the Union government asked her to share her knowledge about Army field medicine. She sent them information but did not travel to deliver her advice in person. Florence was once again in poor health. She continued to be an effective and outspoken activist for her causes, but much of the rest of her work was done from bed. Earlier in her life, Florence has visited several workhouses, institutions set up to house and employ the poor. She had seen the dangerous conditions in such places firsthand and had long been concerned about this issue. By the mid-1860s, the question of how to care for England's poor was becoming an important one. There were voluntary hospitals which provided good health care for poor people, but there were many more sick people in the workhouses, which had no trained nurses at all. Florence was well known now. She used her contacts in the government to work towards getting trained nurses into the workhouses and providing good health care even to those who could not afford to pay for it. The International Red Cross, which provides medical aid, was begun in 1863. Its founder, Henri Dunant, said he was inspired by Florence Nightingale's work in the Crimea. Later, Florence became directly involved with the national branch of the organization, the British Red Cross, when she served as a member of its Ladies' Committee. Florence continued her work for many more years, writing reports, advocating for improved health care, and sharing her expertise. Although she was ill for much of her life, she lived until the age of 90. She died peacefully in her sleep on August 13th, 1910. She left behind an incredible legacy. The International Red Cross began awarding the Florence Nightingale Medal in 1912, 2 years after her death. It honors outstanding nurses. We remember Florence Nightingale today as the driving force behind improvements in nursing during her time, and as a woman of extraordinary vision who believed that no problem, however big it seemed, was ever too big for her to solve. Now in the back, just like the other story, there's a timeline of important events. I'm not going to read them all, but I'll read a lot of them. May 12, 1820, she was born in Florence, Italy. In 1821, the Nightingale family returned to Derbyshire. In 1850, she spent 2 weeks in an orphanage learning about the practice of nursing, and in 1853, she visits hospitals in Paris, France, watching how doctors work. In spring of 1853 was when she started helping poor women who couldn't have health care in London. In 1853, Britain got involved in the Crimean War. And in mid-October 1854, Florence asked to be sent to Turkey to help. In October 21st, Florence and 38 nurses set out to help take care of the soldiers. In November 1854, she arrived in Turkey to help. In February, the British government investigated the causes of death in that hospital, and they found out about the sewer gases that were making everyone sick. In March 30th, 1856, the Crimean War ended. In July 1856, Florence travels back to England and writes reports on how to improve medical care in hospitals. In 1857, a commission is formed to look into the medical care provided by the British Army and wounded and ill soldiers. A lot of that came from her reports. In 1860, the Nightingale Training School for Nurses opens in London. In 1861, the United States government asks Florence for help to share her knowledge about Army field medicine. And in August 13th, 1910, she died at the age of 90. Now, if you want to read more about Florence Nightingale, or if you want to learn more about other amazing people, you can check out pebblego.com and take a peek at some other interesting people. You can also look at some timelines of important events. Have fun, and I'll see you soon.